For those of you who I don't know yet, my name is John Ebenezer. I'm the Burbies here. I'm also, I've been a volunteer in Baltimore County for 28 years, most recently at Providence, and I was a hazmat team leader in DC for 10 years. So we're going to talk a little bit about how to get folks out of personal protective equipment without contaminating ourselves if we're taking our own stuff off, or if we're assisting a crew member with taking gear off if they're being contaminated. So I'm going to pick on John first. He's actually got our blue Smurf gear on. And for this demonstration, he doesn't have the gloves and the mask on, but one of the things to think about is, as Captain's talked about and the county's pushing out information-wise, one of the most important things is protecting our airway and protecting our mucous membranes, our eyes. So any personal protective equipment we have on our face, our respirator, our N95 respirator, our eye protection, should stay on as long as possible. Just like in hazmat, when we teach the SCBA, it's one of the last things that comes off in decon. It's no different here. Because if anything is splashed, as Dr. Barinhold said, something about accidental contact with your face, at least if you accidentally make contact with your face and you have that mask or that eye protection on, it's not as going to be as a severe exposure as others. So one of the things we're talking about, so our common contact areas with our gear is going to be the arms, the chest area, depending on if we're doing airway management or anything like that, as was brought up by Lieutenant Snyder and also with Doc about the things getting aerosolized when we do airway management. So when we go to take all this off, the first thing we would have is 2 pairs of gloves on. If we do the demonstration with Jason with the Tyvek suit on, we'll show how those gloves come off. But 2 layers of gloves, if you can do it, are ideal. Some people would argue they can't start an IV with 2 layers of gloves on, but at the end of the day, we're talking about reducing our exposure and not limiting our skills. So removing the outer layer of glove is the first step in removing contamination. We can reduce our level of contamination by removing personal protective equipment by 90% of anything we do, hazmat or bio-wise, just by properly removing personal protective equipment. So in this particular case, when we're removing PPE, we're basically peeling it off. In this particular case, we would take that outer glove off first and dispose of it or set it aside so for later cleanup, and it would give him a clean pair of gloves. At that point, with a clean pair of gloves, you're not going to touch any of your gear. You're basically going to kind of pull your hands in your sleeves. What's going to happen at that point is if there's another member of the crew, is going to assist him and pull your head slightly back by unzipping the coat. Unfortunately, we have to come in contact with the Velcro, which means this stuff is going to need to be cleaned. And again, we're not talking about
the crew member assisting is wearing gloves too, right?
I'm sorry?
The crew member assisting this process, like you, are wearing gloves.
In this particular case, I would have gloves on. The other thing I would have, or if we have an engine crew that's assisting with decon for whatever reason, or the hazmat team, should be in the same level of personal protective equipment as the person who we're assisting. So whether it's Smurf gear, whether it's Tyvek suit, Tyvek suit's the ideal. Gowns are okay for certain forms of decon, but we have to be real careful about how we remove the other person's PPE. So in this particular case, we're going to unzip this. We're going to work from this area. We're going to pull it backwards. And as we're pulling it backwards, we're rolling it away. And he's going to let his arms fall, and we're just going to take this clean off. So what we've done in this particular case, we're not going to shake this, we're not going to move it, we're going to red bag this for later cleaning and put back in service. It's our imaginary red bag. So in this particular case, the next thing we want to do, so he's got clean gloves on and we've removed the top contamination of clothing, or top contaminated clothing. The next thing that we're going to do, if we're with him, we can help. I'm not going to pull his pants down on camera. We would remove the pants the same way as you do your turnout pants, folding them out and pushing them down. He's got clean gloves on. If he takes his thumbs and sticks them in the waistband of the gear and starts to work them, don't put shorts. This would be one company meeting.
The shorts are optional. Don't make this public. It's bad optics for the company. But this sort of thing is just fine.
So the other thing we do too at this point, if he's got duty shoes on or uniform shoes on, if he kicks those off and steps away to get the gear off, then he can step out of that easily. Now with turnout pants, this is another reason why they're saying no turnout gear, because with turnout gear, we're going to fling contamination everywhere because of how people usually take their turnout off. So once we have this, somebody with personal protective equipment on would take this, place it in a thread bag with the top. Now the boots we would take and we would do a wet decom with those. So he can either put on another pair of gloves over top of his cleans and do this to reduce contamination, or we can do this if I'm already dirty and take a calcified wipe or the hydrogen peroxide solution, spray the boots down and let them sit for a minute or two before he puts them back on. Obviously, if we have a go bag and you have the opportunity to put another pair of shoes in there you can wear temporarily while your duty boots are drying, that's ideal. When we talked about the go bags earlier. So that's how we get the smart gear off. That same thing applies for turnout gear. It's contaminated turnout gear on a fire almost. If you do have it does become contaminated, you can remove it in the same manner. The Tyvek suit, a couple of things with the Tyvek suit. So Jason has 2 layers of gloves on. He's got the Tyvek suits that we are currently carrying do not have the booties on them. So it's going to be the same thing as we remove the gear, or as we remove the Tyvek suit, that we're going to have to be able to reduce that level of contamination with the shoes if anything's come in contact. So we can do one of 2 ways with these. Ideally, if we have 2 people, he can take his shoes off first. If we have a nice, dry, safe area for him to work in to do this. I've actually done this where we've done this evolution inside of a trash bag or a red bag where the person is standing in a red bag, takes their shoes off, steps into the red bag, and takes everything off around them into a red bag. So what we're going to do with this, we don't have the hoods or other things here. Jason has his eye protection and his respiratory protection on, so we're going to leave that on until last. As we're protecting this area, this is what we're worried about. If our hands get dirty or our arms get dirty, we can take care of that with soap and water or sanitizer. So in this particular case, the same thing. Now, if he's got to take his own off, what he would do is he'd take that outer glove off first. And again, you want to be real careful how you remove these gloves, because it's not like a scene in ER or Chicago Med where we're flinging the gloves into the trash can. We want to slowly remove them so that we don't fling contamination everywhere. So you're just going to grab those like that, pull them forward. If you make a fist, it reduces the amount of stretch and flex. I'm sure that the docs that are on the work could probably teach this way better than I could, because they do it a million more times. Grab the inside, pull the glove forward. And again, you see here, we're minimizing the amount of time that we're not doing big movements, small movements. And this would go in the red bag. We would just throw it right there in the red bag. And then the next thing he can do, because he has 2 layers of gloves on and his hands are still protected, is he can reach up and unzip his suit. So you're only going to unzip it to about the midway point, almost where you would put your hands for CPR. Right, yeah, that's enough. So right there is good for a start. And what you're going to do is you're never going to touch the inside of the suit. You're going to grab the outside like this and pinch and pull. And you're just going to pull it back a little bit. And then once it's out a little bit, you'll unzip a little bit more of it. You want to be, or you can do that, which is ideal because you're not making any contact here. And you're folding it out just like that. What he's doing is he's on his own, he's turning it out. If we're assisting him, we would do the same thing as we did with John, where we would have PPE on and face protection, and we're rolling the suit down and away, so that we're not getting anything on the outside of the suit or the inside. Now with this suit, you can simply step out. He still has clean gloves on. And now he can remove his eye protection and his respiratory protection once he's in a safe area. We want to do this, try to do this separately once we've secured all this gear and set it off to the side so there's no potential of stepping back into something and recontaminating. Yeah, what's the best way to dog man that? Just like out up and just exactly like he just did. We're kind of pinch. So with the ones we have, we're going to pinch it. So we'll redemonstrate here in a second. We're going to pinch it and just pull it away, out the way as slowly and as efficiently as possible. One thing we don't want to do is do this and reach for our head and get all our hair contaminated. So by touching material to material instead of material to face, he's pulling it forward and away. And if, as he's got it backwards, if something does fling free from it, it's going to go back here. So again, the goal is We can wash all this stuff. We can wash our hands. We can wash the rest of this, but we can't wash out whatever gets in here. Yeah, exactly. So closing your eyes is another good product, another good practice if you can do that. Again, making sure that we contain the stuff. If it's stuff that can be rewashed and reused, we're gonna bag it and get a hold of the captain. Make sure the EMS lieutenants and get guidance on how we're gonna deal with that. If it's the Tyvek suits, those can be red bagged and disposed of and swapped out. Again, the N95 masks, they're saying if we didn't have a person under investigation or a PUI, or it's not positive, we can reuse the respirators. Just if they're soiled or they got anything on them, we want to try to make sure that those are bagged up, and we'll have somebody, an officer, look at them and make the evaluation whether it needs to be reused or it can be reused or it needs to be disposed of and new one issues. I think that's pretty much everything. Again, with the boots or shoes, the hydrogen peroxide spray down and let those sit for a few minutes. You can actually, as you go into the decon room, if somebody hits those with hydrogen peroxide, by the time you're done with the decon shower process and everything else, those should be okay to put back in. Should be dried and ready to be worn again. Calcicide wipes do okay. The calcicide wipes don't get into the trends, which is really where if you step on anything and call them the yucky calls, it's not going to get down inside of it. You need something a little bit more force to get down inside the trends of the shoes. And again, that's one of the reasons why no turnout gear, because the cracks and crevices are more, the material is more absorbent to biohazards, and the boots themselves are hard enough to clean. So that is pretty much it. Thanks to John and Jason for helping me out with that. I appreciate it. Cap, you got anything else for us? Are you doing anything else?
We have we have a couple of healthcare providers who are making some comments. So one thing to just consider, and I just wonder what your thoughts about this, what Baltimore County is teaching. So as Jason shed his outer gloves and generated clean inner gloves, he then touched his zipper, right? Which caused an issue. So just
I'm sorry. What he should have done, obviously, and that's my mistake, he should have had the outer glove. With these Tyvek suits, if you pull them apart, the zipper's going to come open. Some won't do that. What we do in hazmat typically is we'll put a tape tab on it so that we don't have to touch the suit at all, where we have a little bit of a tab there to pull. A little bit different, slightly different from what healthcare does. So if we can minimize contact, if the assumption is that the suit is contaminated itself, and we can do this and separate it, I might be able to do it with my mouth, but separating it like this and causing the zipper to come down without actually touching it, we could do that with the contaminated outer glove on. It's just a little bit safer. The good thing about the clean outer glove is it's just that, it's a clean outer glove. We have luxury. I think, Doc, actually you mentioned it earlier about, pause for a second, think about what we're doing before we just rush into things. And that is exactly where that type of mistake that you just caught would have been caught by stopping and thinking for a second.
One of the things that they teach us in the hospital is between every step, we gel our hands. So alcohol-based solution, even when we shed that outer glove, even on the clean inner glove, is to go ahead and alcohol-based alcohol them. And I don't know if you guys teach for that, or if that's okay.
No, and that's a great step. And with the alcohol-based sanitizer, you don't have the hold time that you're required for other things. So, and with the gloves, you're going to see, at least like with the blue gloves, one of the things we do in hazmat is 2 different colored gloves. So we know if that outer glove has been breached, we can see the color of the inner glove, which is a good practice in this particular case, because we do when you had the outer glove off. But in your case, in the healthcare side, if it's a lighter colored glove, you can see what you've covered with the sanitizer as well. But that is a great practice. And that's something, honestly, outside of the healthcare side of things, on the response side, on the hazmat side, it's not something we typically do. Even with stuff like anthrax and Ebola.
And somebody asked if you could demonstrate how the proper way to put an N95 back on.
It's a great one.
Well, just to clarify, if you're removing it because it's contaminated on a PUI.
But if you're putting one on, it's clean. So again, and kind of if we're dressing out, when we're en route to a scene, the last thing I think Kat mentioned earlier, the medic crew going out on this last call, had their tie back on before they left the station, which is a good step. But you want to wait to put your respiratory protection on until you absolutely have to. Kind of no different than going on air with a mask when you're on a fire call. So in this particular case, you'll see Jason puts his chin in first, pulls the straps back, and kind of gets the strap settled, and then pulls it up. Now with these N95 masks, this particular N95 mask has the valve on it, the exhalation valve. You'll get a little bit of negative pressure on the inside. So once you get that settled and you push on the nose and check your seams, if you put your hands on either side of that and kind of exhale real hard, you should feel a little bit of resistance. It's not going to be a whole lot like it would with like a half-face respirator or a SCBA, but you'll feel a little bit because there is a little bit of negative pressure in here. Those in the healthcare side that typically work with this know that most of the times, and of course we just went through it here in Baltimore County, an N95 mask requires a fit test. And the reason under OSHA why it requires a fit test is because there's a slight negative pressure behind it. You don't need a fit test for a dust mask or a surgical mask, but you do for the N95 because of that pressure.
Right over here is where you're seeing a lot of people aren't getting that metal.
Yeah, and you do need to use that metal bridge there. And you be careful with it too, because if you feel one of those break, or if there's any deficiency in the mask should be thrown away because the manufacturer no longer guarantees that seal or that level of protection if anything is wrong with the mask. Any tears, if it's soiled or it's wet, or if this metal bridge breaks and punctures the material on the surface. Thanks, Jason. Any other questions? Anything
Thank
from
you.
my used to a smaller healthcare audience, but I'm curious if there's anything else that you guys have to add to this, because it's good for me too, because I learn every time I teach something. I teach MIFRE hazmat. I teach as a consultant all over the country, and I learn something new every time I do one of these classes. So the gel, actually the sanitizer on a different layer of gloves is a new one for me, but that makes perfect sense. And if you have the ability to do that on our calls, I suggest you do it, because from a science standpoint, it does dramatically reduce your risk. Even though it's not in any, I don't think it's in any of our SOPs yet. So
there's a question from the audience that says if we're using N95s, gloves should be on before touching the outside of the mask to put it back on?
if you're putting on a clean mask, it doesn't matter. Me personally, everybody has their own way of doing it. I do all the fine tasks like putting a respirator on and making sure it's adjusted before I put my mask on or put my gloves on, because I lose dexterity. I have Mickey Mouse hands, so I lose the manual dexterity if I put 2 layers of gloves on that I normally would have. Now, healthcare facilities may have a different protocol. When we're doing all this, we're putting the mask on, we're in a clean environment. This is before we would go in to assess the patient or respond in to work the cardiac arrest or whatever the case may be. We're going to do all this outside in the clean area before we make entry into the residence or the nursing home or whatever the case may be. The doffing part we can do preferably right at the edge of what we would call the hot zone, or the area of concern, or in a kind of an intermediate area, kind of a warm zone where we're on the porch of the house, not quite inside. Before we would actually get it, we would certainly not do it in the medic unit. For the engine crews, we would do it before we got back inside of the engine and make sure we secured everything before the medic left, red bag wise. On the medic unit, we would do it. Obviously, whoever the provider is providing patient care would do it at the hospital after they've terminated patient care, because you want to maintain that level of PPE, obviously, during patient care. And you may have, in most cases, it may be more practical for us to have additional people help with the doffing of PPE, just because it will truly reduce that level of exposure. And again, it does require another person in PPE, which may be ultimately at some points in short supply. So we just have to evaluate what we're doing with regard to that.
John, hi, it's Kathleen. I just needed to make a correction. And again, this goes back to the triple emails per day we get now. Just today, a new donning and doffing procedure came out. So I forget who asked about the gloves and putting on the mask. So the new donning sequence starting today is gown, gloves, then N95 mask, and then eye protection, where normally you would have put the mask and then your gloves on. But this is because the donning sequence has been altered to accommodate the possibility of providers donning a previously used mask. So they want you to do gown, gloves, mask, eye. I will say though, when I read this, my only concern is that if you are using a previously used mask and you put your gloves on first and then the mask, and they're changing that procedure, then you're putting your eye protection on, you just touched your previously used mask. So I would suggest either doing a glove change or doing the hand sanitizer before donning your safety glasses. But this came out today, and it is, I believe, in an email that Scott sent out.
Yeah, I was just glancing at that actually right before we got up here, and I was kind of scratching my head about the same thing.
So you can put the mask on your face.
So, and I know that they gave us,
But
we
it's
have
too
high-tech
contaminated.
bags to put your masks in so they dry. Ultimately, and if you go back and you look at the manufacturer of the mask, it actually tells you not to, in most cases, if you reuse this and it's soiled to the point where you have to wear gloves to put it back on, we're doing something wrong. But the SOP is the SOP, you know, what the county writes. I'm sure that they have researched it before they put it on paper, and they probably can cite where it came from. I can tell you in 10 years of doing hazmat, I've never reused an N95 mask. Now I know that's a supply chain issue now with the pandemic, but I've been in parts of the world that supply chain is an issue, and we still didn't reuse N95 masks. But if you've been on a call that's not a PUI or not a positive, then it should be fine. I know that there's a bunch of stuff floating around on the internet about microwaving N95s and doing this, that, and the other thing, but I haven't seen where any of it. I think Glenn's going to pass out back there. I haven't seen anywhere where that's been proven. I know that there's a lot of research being done on it, but you know, again, you're talking about $5 mask and probably a $20 process to sanitize it and reuse it.
All right, are you guys good?
Antibacterial hand sanitizer.
Yeah, so the question about the antibacterial hand sanitizer, absolutely. That should be, you should leave it dry. It's got to have 70, 60, 70% alcohol, so it's going to dry relatively quickly. Not quite as quickly as say acetone, but it's going to dry. It's want to become a vapor, so it's going to dry relatively quickly.
We do have on the
And
front of the medic.
don't take the chance to rush.
Put that on hands or?
You can put it on what Doc was saying is their procedure is to take their second glove and they take the first glove off. They put it on the second glove as kind of a re-cleaning.
Or, you know, after you put on your mask, before you put on your goggles.
I can tell you that nothing that's clean is going anywhere near these when I put a goggle on, because I've seen cases where you had that exposure to the mucous membranes where stuff has gotten in. So if I got to wear 3 layers of gloves, put my respirator on, I guess that's what I'm going to do. But
Acetone kills virus?
no. Well, I take that back. Theoretically, it should do damage to it, but I don't know if it'll actually kill it. The only thing they test, I know they've tested it against, and Doc and Kathleen, correct me if I'm wrong, but I know they've tested it against like our calvicide wipes, bleach solution, hydrogen peroxide, and there was one other thing, and I can't remember what it was.
Soap.
Soap and water, right?
So the word in healthcare is that this virus is exquisitely sensitive to almost any commercially available product that would ever been marketed. So certainly anything that the county issues is more than sufficient. Yeah, the bug is very sensitive. We just have to try to kill it and clean it, and we will.
Yeah, I know it's not as aggressive as like Ebola or some of the others where it's
Correct.
very difficult to kill. But it's funny, I think you mentioned it, Dr. Barron, I think you mentioned it earlier, that the PPE removal is a big piece of this. And I know a lot of the exposures that we saw, like with Ebola, which is obviously much nastier in some respects, actually the issues with healthcare providers getting it were either improper PPE use or improper removal. that led to a lot of those, and the most recent outbreak a few years ago. So that is definitely something to think about. Like I said before, stop, think, take your time. You know, it's no different than when I teach rescue class, I teach our probies. Isopropyl alcohol, that was the other one. Thank you. I know there was one I couldn't remember. You know, we teach the probies. It's not your emergency. You know, take the time, protect yourself, think through things before just rushing in, and it certainly applies here.
My arm is getting tired.
All right, you
That
guys
was
all
really great. Thank you. I recorded this and we'll make it available on the Pikesville YouTube site.